In honor of September being Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, I wanted to put together a more specific video around the correlation between suicide and suicidal ideation and toxic workplace culture, specifically from a gendered awareness perspective, in which I focus on the experiences of empathetic women leaders, those who have a strong sense of calling and purpose in their work, who also then may experience toxic workplace environments, and the deep conflict and dilemma one faces when feeling strongly about one's work and purpose, but also facing chronic psychological abuse, and how to negotiate that in a way that allows one to feel stable mentally and physically, or possibly leave that environment. So the fact that suicide and toxic workplace culture are related is not a new concept. The idea of unsafe working conditions has been a reality since the beginning of time, but I think more recently the impact of mental health and the impact of psychological abuse within institutions that on the outside present a message of equity, equality, and positivity, really behind closed doors, maybe exhibiting some of the kind of conditions that lead to extreme levels of depletion, mental breakdown, physical breakdown, particularly for this population that I work with in my research and coaching work, which is empathetic, purpose-driven women leaders. I think the most important thing to realize is that a lot of these dynamics are insidious. When we talk about gender in the workplace, oftentimes we think of overt examples of sexual harassment or unequal pay, things that are very visual and obvious and easily identified or prosecuted, or others made accountable to make those systems more equitable. But when we talk about gender and psychological abuse within workplace culture, a lot of it is insidious, involving gaslighting, denial, particularly among those who have sort of a historical power hold within institutions that are, again, historically patriarchal. We're talking about higher ed, healthcare, faith-based institutions, but also smaller entities, family-owned businesses, smaller businesses that may be able to hide some of these behaviors more easily because there's less accountability. So I'm going to give a couple examples of what are some of the conditions that may lead to the extreme feelings of suicide or suicidal ideation within toxic workplace culture for this population of women that I work with. First and foremost, because I work with empathetic women, the idea of empathy being exploited is a primary concern within toxic workplace culture. There are gender expectations that women take on more of the emotional load or absorb the anxiety within family systems and workplace systems, simply because of this expectation for women to be everything for everyone. Women are conditioned to be people pleasers, to satisfy others' emotional and physical needs, and that can lead to extreme levels of exploitation in which organizations take advantage of that and expect women leaders and women employees to take on more responsibilities at the cost of their own sense of well-being, oftentimes with no increased pay related to additional responsibilities, and the kind of pushback they receive when women would resist that kind of additional expectation. So exploitation of empathy, or this expectation of self-emptying, or what I've referred to as feminized servanthood. That idea that in particular women societally continue to be expected to fulfill needs above and beyond those of their male counterparts. The second element that's really prevalent in my coaching work and as well as in my research is the double bind expectations that women leaders experience. That's double bind expectations. That means that when you're fulfilling one set of expectations, it means that you then necessarily cannot fill another set of expectations because they are mutually exclusive. And in this case, the double bind expectations for women leaders is often this unspoken expectation to be performing both one's gender role of being a relational female or a compliant or agreeable woman, but then also leadership expectations of being agentic or decisive, or being able to say no and set boundaries. When women are placed in the space of needing to fulfill both of those simultaneously, it's extremely hard to satisfy all of those needs, because oftentimes to be a decisive leader, you have to be able to say no and disappoint people and not be that agreeable, compliant, kind of traditional female role that's still expected in many historically patriarchal institutions. Another critical element of the extreme levels of mental health concerns within toxic workplaces is institutional gaslighting. So when women come forward and say that they're being put in these positions of unsustainable expectations, whether it be double bind expectations or exploitation of their empathy, there is oftentimes a insidious and consistent level of denial and also turning against that woman to say that her experience is not valid. And when gaslighting occurs, it can be extremely detrimental to one's mental health because it causes one to question, is my concern valid? Am I experiencing my own reality in a way that is actually true? And it causes women oftentimes to second guess or override experiences of extreme psychological abuse. Another element that leads to, again, suicidal ideation or extreme levels of emotional burnout is aggressive targeting and bullying of women leaders, particularly those who push against this exploitation of empathy, saying, no, this is a line I'm drawing. This is not in my job description. I should not be expected to take on these additional responsibilities without higher pay, or the expectation to absorb system anxiety. If a woman is self-differentiated, she is not enmeshed in a workplace culture and is able to draw lines and set boundaries and say, look, this is not okay. For women who exhibit that kind of healthy boundary setting and self-differentiation, they can experience aggressive targeting, bullying, and what I refer to as gendered scapegoating, in which an institution or a small group or faction within an institution turn against a woman and create a narrative around her that really sets her up to be isolated and in many cases demonized or vilified within an organization that is not willing to have multiple points of narrative. They are promoting a single narrative, a power structure and hierarchy that they are digging their heels in to defend and to promote at the cost of this woman really being sort of sent out to the wolves, as many of my clients have described, that suddenly the organization turns on them simply for having healthy and appropriate boundaries. So when you put all these together, there are really two outcomes that I've seen with both my research and coaching work, where either you have a woman who leans into these expectations of being everything for everyone and sort of allowing that empathy to be exploited. She is driven to the edge by depletion, emotional, physical, financial depletion. And the other outcome is the woman I just mentioned, which is a self-differentiated woman who resists some of these narratives and expectations. And she then is painted as this sort of dissident daughter or disruptor or someone who is trying to sort of bring down an organization. And she is scapegoated. So you're driven to the edge by depletion, or you are scapegoated, leading to executive derailment or push to leave forces that often cause women to be forced to resign from their positions without any recourse. And so when you have women put into sort of between a rock and a hard place between these options, they can feel like one is trapped. Either one accepts these unsustainable expectations or one is then penalized for resisting them. And really the first thing to do for women who are experiencing this is, and in my work with my clients, I try to name these dynamics first to enable the woman to understand them as systemic and not just personal to her or an attack on her personality or some inefficiency or lack of competence in her leadership, that these are systemic gender dynamics, and that allows her to see her context as something that is depersonalized, meaning it's not a lack in something that she has, an employee as a leader. These are systemic gendered issues. The other important thing that I offer my clients is that understanding this experience chronically, the body sees it and identifies it as a form of trauma. Trauma are experiences or ongoing conditions that then live in our body and are very difficult to recover from if not looking at it through an embodied lens. So I work with my clients to really go inside the embodied experience of being exposed to these conditions and do healing practices, embodied healing practices that help restore a sense of wholeness, integrity, and dignity as one either navigates or recovers from these toxic workplace environments. And finally, working with women that I work through a feminist lens. A feminist lens is one that identifies these systemic gendered narratives and the ways in which women are conditioned and socialized to either absorb them, or society around us is conditioned to penalize women who resist them. So by applying that feminist narrative, I'm really helping and encouraging my clients to rewrite and rewire the ways in which they've related to people, related to work, related to calling, and to be able to find a more deep and authentic sense of voice and purpose as they recover from these really challenging dynamics.